Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. We wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to see the Secretary and the First Lady's remarks for the International Women of Courage Awards. That brings us to our first announcement today. In recognition of International Women's Day, the U.S. Department of State is proud to once again celebrate the immense courage, strength, and leadership of women through the annual International Women of Courage Awards. Just a few minutes ago, Secretary Blinken continued our long-standing tradition of honoring an extraordinary group of women leaders at the 17th annual IWOC Awards ceremony. In celebration of the return to our first in-person ceremony since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, this year's ceremony took place at the White House. Secretary Blinken was joined by First Lady Jill Biden, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield, Undersecretary Zaya, senior official in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues Kat Fodevat, and other high-level U.S. government officials, and applauding these incredible women. From defending the rights of LGBTQI+ persons in Argentina, to advocating for equal access to justice in Jordan, to fighting for the rights of persons with disabilities in Malaysia, and beyond, the 2023 International Women of Courage have set an example that we should all strive to follow. Their strength is endless, their courage is unyielding, and their leadership inspires us all. In a few days, the awardees will embark on an international visitor leadership program exchange to meet and engage with American counterparts in civil society, academia, government, and the private sector in cities across the United States. This year, in honor of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright's legacy and her championship of women's rights, we are proud to announce a new annual Madeleine Albright Honorary Group International Women of Courage Award. Given her longstanding support for women's empowerment and leadership, we can't think of someone who exemplifies the goals and values of the IWOC Award better than former Secretary Albright. This honorary group award provides us the opportunity to recognize the courage and leadership of women who would not normally be able to be feasibly or safely recognized with an individual IWOC award. We're proud to recognize the women and girl protesters of Iran with the inaugural Madeleine Albright Group Honorary Award this year. We know that countries that empower women and girls to be safe and meaningful participants in social, political, and economic life are more just, they're more peaceful and prosperous. It is a great privilege for the United States to recognize our IWOC awardees for their efforts to advance human rights and highlight the contributions of all women working for a better future. We remain deeply committed to advancing gender equity and equality at home and around the world as a central foreign policy and national security priority. For more information and updates on the 2023 International Women of Courage, we encourage you to follow the hashtags Women of Courage and IWOC 2023 on social media. Next and finally, the Black Sea Grain Initiative is a vital tool to combat global food insecurity and stabilize food prices. The United States strongly supports the efforts of Secretary General Guterres in partnership with Turkey to bring Ukrainian and Russian grain to world markets. We echo the Secretary General's call from Kyiv today for the initiative to be extended and expanded before March 18th, and we agree that the initiative should enable the greatest possible use of Black Sea export infrastructure. Since August of last year, more than 23 million metric tons of grains and oilseeds have shipped through the humanitarian corridor created by this initiative. This includes over 4 million metric tons of wheat that have gone directly to developing countries, the equivalent of about 8 billion loaves of bread. The initiative facilitated 16 ships from the World Food Program with grain destined for places in the world facing the most dire food security crises, like Yemen, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Before the Black Sea Grain Initiative, when Russia was blocking Ukraine's food exports, prices of wheat and fertilizer spiked nearly 30%, a price shock that disproportionately affected vulnerable people worldwide. The Black Sea Grain Initiative has been successful in keeping the prices down, the grain flowing, and millions of food insecure people in the developing world have been saved from acute food insecurity. The bottom line is that the world needs Ukrainian grain, and we are all better off when Ukrainian grain gets to world markets. With that, happy to take your questions.
Right. Thanks, Ned. Sorry I missed the very top, so I don't know what you were talking about then. Was it your departure?
No, we were talking about the International Women of Courage Award, yes.
Oh, okay, all right. Something far more important.
Far more important, yes.
Personnel matters. Well, anyway, on the subject of personnel matters, let me just say, and I'll let Sean speak for the association, but just on a personal note, I wanted to say thank you for your time up here. I'll have more to say, and there'll be a proper, I'm sure, time for a proper send-off slash roast with perhaps a couple of surprises on the occasion of your final briefing from the podium. But anyway,
you're making me nervous hearing about
Yeah,
this, but
well.
I appreciate the sentiment. Well, thank you.
anyway, let's start for right now with I'm very curious about this flurry of reports, both here and in Germany, over the Nord Stream 2 sabotage and these what appear to be more than just suggestions and fanciful speculation that Ukraine or pro-Ukrainian groups, Ukrainian partisans, were responsible. And I'm just wondering what you make of all this, particularly in light of a report, one specific report that I think remains unmatched by anyone, that the U.S. was actually responsible for this.
So, Matt, I'm glad you posed the question because I want to be very clear about this. First, importantly, we're not in a position to confirm the report you're alluding to. The anonymous claim.
Which
I'm referring to the report that came out yesterday.
the reports that came out, but it was more than one. I mean, there's like 4 in Germany and at least 2 in the U.S.
So
saying it was all signs suggest that Ukraine or Ukrainian partisans were behind.
So, as to all of those reports, I'm not in a position to confirm them. I want to be very clear about that. The anonymous claim in the first report, as I understand the chronology of this, to be clear, is not downgraded intelligence shared by the U.S. government, and the sources quoted in that piece were not authorized to speak on behalf of the U.S. government. Our point on this has been consistent. There is an active, ongoing investigation on the part of 3 of our European partners, the Germans, the Swedes, the Danes, and that is ongoing, as we always do when there's a matter that's the subject of an ongoing investigation. We will let those investigations play out before we'll offer any comment.
On this point, that's
Sure.
great. But of course, first, I also want to give a shout out to you being there day after day, always being professional and courteous. Thank you and best of luck
Thank you.
in your coming endeavors. On this point, but you certainly have suspects. I mean, you suspect someone is behind this sabotage, correct? I mean, do you suspect the Russians, for instance? Could the Russians have done something to their own pipeline or their own oil to destroy it?
Saeed, it's not productive or constructive for me to engage in speculation, certainly not from the podium, and certainly not when there are ongoing investigations. And these are not just any investigations, these are ongoing investigations by competent, capable authorities in 3 of our close European partners, the Germans, the Danes, the Swedes. So we will defer to them. Obviously, on the course of those investigations, they will be the one to report on the findings that they come up with in the course of these investigations, but we're just not going to get ahead of what they may uncover.
So you dismissed what was written in the New York Times on this group?
I'm not dismissing anything. I'm not ruling anything in. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm just saying we're not confirming, we're not commenting on the specifics in any of the reports that have emanated over recent days, and we're not doing that for a very simple reason. There are ongoing investigations, whether it's an investigation into an undersea blast like this or an investigation into any other criminal or terrorist activity. Our typical posture is to let the investigation play out, and that's what we're doing here.
Well, except the problem with that is that you were very quick to say that the earlier report from last month that said that President Biden had ordered this.
When
you were very quick to say, no, absolutely not, that's preposterous, that's ridiculous, instead of saying, well, let's let the investigation play out.
Yeah.
So what are we to think then when
You
a
were
report comes
to think that the reports that the United States government had anything to do with the undersea blast against the Nord Stream pipelines is ridiculous. We can discount that
why
out of
can't,
hand.
Well, but you can't say the same about the reports that it was a Ukraine or Ukrainian partisans who were behind
Because
it,
Matt,
right?
we can speak to our actions when it comes
or non-actions.
or actions that we did not take in this case. Yes, thank you. When it comes to who may have been responsible for what did in fact happen to these undersea pipelines, we're going to have to defer to the investigations. Daphne,
Is it okay if I switch to Mexico?
please.
The Americans that were kidnapped by gunmen in Mexico, have the bodies of the 2 who died been repatriated?
So Daphne, we're continuing to work very closely with our Mexican counterparts on this. We've asked Mexican officials to fulfill the family's wishes for the remains to be repatriated as expeditiously as possible. As of earlier today, that process was still underway. We know that our Mexican partners are working just as quickly as they can to finalize that process. Again, we express our deepest condolences to the families, to the loved ones of the two Americans who were killed in this violence. Our embassy in Mexico City, our consulate in Matamoros, have been working to support the families, to support their wishes, and working hand in glove with Mexican authorities and our U.S. government counterparts as well.
And do you know if any of the 4 Americans had any previous trips or dealings with Mexico?
I couldn't say, and that's not the sort of thing we typically would say from the podium. We want to respect the privacy of the Americans who were brought to safety and are now back in the United States. Of course, they are free to speak as much or as little as they would like. It's not our place to do so, but it is our place to remind all Americans of the travel advisories that are on our website and that we have pointed to a number of times when it comes to this incident and when it comes to the threat risk more broadly. This is an area that we categorize as a level 4. We have a level 4 travel advisory, meaning that Americans should not travel to this particular Mexican state because it is dangerous. We have seen incidents of criminality, of violence, and we certainly don't want to see Americans unnecessarily in harm's way.
And have you gotten any additional information since yesterday on why you believe they were kidnapped and what happened?
There is an active, and this goes back to the first topic we were discussing, there is an active investigation. Our Mexican counterparts are investigating. The FBI, of course, is involved because of the deaths and abduction of American citizens. So we're going to let that investigation play out. We won't be in a position to provide investigative updates because we want to see accountability rendered in this case. It is important to us that justice is done for the deaths of these 2 Americans, for the abduction of these 4 Americans, and we don't want to do or say anything that could stand in the way of that accountability. Sean.
Thanks. First of all, I mean, not to have too many sayings on this, but just one word of appreciation, in particular, for restoring the daily briefings. We're here today because they've been restored, and it's important on behalf of the association. It's important that you've done that.
Appreciate that.
Could I go to Taiwan?
Sure.
I know you were asked about this yesterday, but Speaker McCarthy has said publicly that he's planning to meet President Tsai in California. I know, congressional decisions are for Congress or for the Speaker himself, but do you have any stance on whether this is a good idea, and particularly whether it's okay for President Tsai to come to the United States?
This is a decision when it comes to Speaker McCarthy's travel that the Speaker himself will make, a decision that only the Speaker in his office can make. So, of course, we refer you to the Speaker's office for further information about his potential travel. I understand that his office has commented, he has confirmed this meeting, but we would refer you to him and to his office for the details. What I will say, and this gets to your question, that transits of the United States by high-level Taiwan officials are consistent with long-standing U.S. policy and with our unofficial and strong relations with Taiwan. President Tsai herself has transited the United States 6 times in the last 7 years. There has been absolutely no change to the U.S. One China policy. We remain committed to our longstanding One China policy, which has not changed. It is and has always been guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, and the 6 assurances.
I noticed you used the word transit rather than visit. I know that's in the past been the case, but actually having a meeting in California, that's consistent with a transit by the Taiwanese president.
Well, again, I would have to refer you to the Speaker for any additional details on what his plans may be. But the presence of in the United States of high-ranking Taiwanese officials, that is nothing new. It is not something that would break any new ground. It is entirely consistent with the status quo that's been dictated by our One China policy.
Well, but I noticed that you dropped the standard line. Maybe this has been dropped before and I just missed it, but why is it that these transits are okay for the do I have to spell it out for you? Safety, comfort, and convenience, right? Is that no longer in the talking points?
That is that.
Okay, and so exactly how is spending like 3 days in LA, you know, I mean, it may be comfortable and it may be convenient, kind of like spending 2 weeks in Palm Springs on U.S. government dime preparing for APEC. But why are you not repeating them now? Or is it just that you decided not?
There's no reason. There has been no change in our policy on this. The transit of high-level Taiwan officials is consistent. It's been done before. It is a practice.
No one's saying it hasn't been done
Right.
before, but I mean, can you honestly say that having her, that allowing her to transit through LA and spend several days there is in keeping with the safety, comfort, and convenience line in the policy?
I couldn't speak to President Tsai's travel plans. I can't speak specifically to Speaker McCarthy's travel plans. But what I can say is that this sort of transit is entirely consistent with our One China policy and the unofficial and strong relations we have with Taiwan.
Okay, well, you know, if I was flying from the U.S. to China and decided to stop in L.A. for 3 days, I don't think the airline would say that that's transit, right? So, I don't know. I think something's got to change. If you're no longer using that, then those 3 words for the buzzwords for why Taiwanese officials are allowed to visit the U.S., then I'd just like to know why and when they were dropped.
Matt, the core point here, despite those 3 words, is the status quo. This is consistent with the status quo. It's consistent with our One China policy. There hasn't been any change in the way in which we apply our One China policy. The types of things that we're discussing, and again, would have to refer you to the Speaker and to President Tsai for their particular plans, but they are entirely consistent with the unofficial and the strong relationship we have with
But there
Taiwan.
are no plans, last one, there are no plans for any State Department officials to see her?
I'm not aware of any such plans.
Thank you.
Just one more Taiwan.
The Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang, he said recently that the U.S. Statements, I'm paraphrasing, but that the U.S. Warnings against against China militarily supplying Russia, that there's a hypocrisy issue, and that the U.S. is supplying weapons to Taiwan. Do you have any response to that?
Look, I'm not going to get into a tit for tat with Chinese foreign minister, but what I will say is that comments like that seem to overlook precisely the state of play. What the United States is doing, along with dozens of countries around the world, is supporting the rules-based order, supporting the order that is enshrined in the UN Charter, in international law, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the principles at play that a big country can't bully a small country, a larger country can't attempt to redraw borders by force that doesn't make right. These are the same principles that, in this case, the PRC has signed on to as a member state of the UN and as a country that purports to believe in these very documents and principles, the UN Charter, the precepts of international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What we are doing similarly in Taiwan, with Taiwan, is attempting to strengthen and to protect and preserve the status quo. This is all about the preservation of the status quo, because the status quo has, over the course of decades now, really been at the crux of peace and security across the Taiwan Strait and in the broader region. This is the same rules-based order that has been at the core of peace and security, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Indo-Pacific. So for anyone to suggest that what we are doing is inconsistent is overlooking, I think, the core concepts that are at play. Everything that we're doing in the course of Ukraine, everything that we're doing in support of Taiwan is consistent with the rules-based order. It is an effort to undermine the status quo, which in Europe and Indo-Pacific is responsible, has been responsible for the peace and security that has prevailed for much of the past 7 decades. Alex.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me echo the sentiment in the room. Everything that could be said have already been said. I just can only add that our loss in this briefing room will be great gain of those on the 8th or 7th floor.
Thank you.
If you want a preview on how you can advise the Secretary on South Caucasus and Russia, Ukraine, you're welcome to talk about that as well.
Thanks.
Moving to Georgia, if you don't mind. I was wondering if the events of past 24 hours have changed your view on how to respond to the events.
Well, Alex, just as we were yesterday, we're continuing to closely monitor the ongoing protests and the developments on the ground. We urge the government of Georgia to respect the freedom of peaceful assembly and peaceful protest. We urge all parties to exercise restraint and to avoid any escalatory or violent actions while respecting the rule of law and Georgia's democratic values. We are, as we've said consistently in recent days, deeply troubled by the recently introduced draft foreign agent laws, which, if actually made law, would stigmatize and silence independent voices and citizens of Georgia who are dedicated to building a better future within their own communities. Parliament's advancing of these Kremlin-inspired draft laws is incompatible with the people of Georgia's clear desire for European integration and its democratic development. Pursuing these laws, we believe, will damage Georgia's relations with its strategic partners and jeopardizes Georgia's Euro-Atlantic future. These are at the heart of the aspirations of the Georgian people, the project that the Georgian people have pursued over the course of decades now, since Georgia's independence. The United States has been a strategic partner to Georgia. Georgia has aspirations for fuller integration with Europe and the EU. All of those things are in play in the context of the debate that we see raging now in Tbilisi.
Thank you for that. Let me unpack that a little bit. What we see, there's a Georgian Dream government on one hand has already made its choice. It's beating the Russian bidding, and there's Georgian people out there. They are standing strong, as you articulated yesterday as well, that they are expressing their their desire to stick with European pathway. Who are you standing with at this point?
Again, we are standing with the people of Georgia and the aspirations that they have. It would be our hope that the government of Georgia, as is our hope around the world, that governments reflect the aspirations of their own people. When it comes to what we're seeing now, of course, we always stand with the right of citizens around the world to exercise their universal rights. It is a universal right to freedom of assembly. It is a universal right to peaceful protest. It is a universal right to freedom of expression. We always stand with those who are peacefully exercising their universal rights. Now, when it comes to these draft laws, this is ultimately a question for the Georgian government. We have made our views on this very clear. We've made those views very clear as a partner to Georgia over the course of decades now, a partner that has helped usher Georgia from its immediate post-independent phase to its consolidation of its democracy, the development of its economy, its aspirations for greater integration in the Euro-Atlantic region. We want to be in a position to continue to do that. Now, obviously, there are a number of countries and entities around the world who share these concerns. We've heard from the EU, we've heard from the UN, but the voices that we are listening to most closely are those voices on the ground in Georgia. And we have heard strong protests and concern expressed on the part of Georgian civil society groups, of independent actors who are, in our view, legitimately concerned that the passage and the ratification of these laws would hamper and hinder their ability to exercise the very universal rights that are at play in these protests.
That's a strong reaction. Now, the argument on the ground is that it's time, if not now, then when, is the time to translate that reaction into action. You mentioned that lawmakers who will vote for that will be responsible. Isn't it better to hold them accountable beforehand, before they move to a second read, third reading, instead of waiting and seeing what's going to happen next?
Alex, this is a logic that really applies across the board. we are not in a position to make choices for any other country. We are in a position to see to it that actors, countries, governments around the world make informed decisions, and that they are witting of the consequences of those decisions. We are concerned that the passage of this type of legislation would have consequences for our ability to continue to be the strategic partner that we have sought to be for Georgia and the people of Georgia over the course of decades now. The same would be true of, same could be true, I should say, of the EU and others. But again, this is a matter before the Parliament. It is a matter that has engendered a good deal of debate and protest among the people of Georgia, we think with good reason, because the implications would be hefty on the people of Georgia, and the implications could well be meaningful for the type of relationship we want to continue to have with the government of Georgia.
And my last one on this, there are also, comments on the ground that what we're seeing today is also a result of ignorance, or maybe like we didn't pay enough attention from the West to what was going on in Georgia for a long time. There have been after U.S. ambassador, EU ambassador, what they're doing to their former president. The criticism is that even today when we see this annual SET assessment report came out, there is no mentioning of Georgia at all. The criticism is that U.S. turned its blind eyes, and let this just slide, and that's the result of U.S. lack of the U.S. attention in the region.
Alex, I think it's hard to accept the premise of that when we've been talking about this very issue over the course of the past week. We've had a number of occasions before these foreign agent laws became a live subject in Georgia to talk about the strategic partnership that we have with Georgia. This is a project that the United States has been deeply engaged in over the course of decades now, since Georgia first declared its independence in 1991. We have been a partner along the way. We have sought to do everything we can to support the development of Georgia's democracy, of its economy, of its further integration into Europe and with Europe as well. The EU has been a partner in that. The international community has been a partner in that. Now, the testimony you heard today from our senior intelligence officials, that's focused on threats. That is focused on threats to the United States. There is, and again, I don't want to characterize intelligence, but we see Georgia as a place that holds tremendous opportunity. It is not in the category of threats as we traditionally conceive of them. There is an opportunity with Georgia to continue to be that partner, to continue to walk down that path of democracy, of responsible governance, and a Georgia that is in a position to achieve the aspirations of its citizens. That's an opportunity for the United States as a partner to Georgia. First and foremost, it's an opportunity for the people of Georgia to fulfill those aspirations. Said.
Thank you. I want to switch topics to the Palestinian issue. With where you began at the top on the occasion of the International Women's Day. I mean, there are 12% of Palestinian households are run by women, responsibility of women. There are 200 women in Israeli prison today. Some of them have given birth, and their children are with them in the prison. They're toddlers. But my question to you is also, this is something I found out today. Women in Gaza, who suffer breast cancer, for instance, or have symptoms of breast cancer, they resort to mastectomies and lumpectomies and so on as preventive medicine, because they're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed by the Israelis or by the Egyptians to leave and seek medical care. And my question to you, should they be allowed to seek medical care and have free transit to Egypt, to Israel, to the West Bank, to other places?
Saeed, we've talked about the dynamic that is at play here before. First, Israel, of course, faces legitimate threats to its own security. Some of those threats have no. I'm not saying that. Some of those threats, of course, have emanated from Gaza. Israel has the need to take measures to defend itself, to protect against the threats that it has far too frequently endured from Gaza. Now, you're raising a humanitarian issue. We think it is possible to take steps to mitigate the threat that Israel has faced from terrorists and militants in Gaza while allowing for the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people in Gaza to be fulfilled. This is something that we have focused on, and we have had discussions with Israel and with our counterparts in the Palestinian authorities and the Palestinian Authority about ways to fulfill that imperative of ensuring the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza are met. For our part, we have provided a significant amount of humanitarian assistance, as you know. We reestablished our relationship with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people, and in doing so, have provided more than $900 million to the people of Gaza, to Palestinians in the West Bank over the course of this administration. We want to see those basic needs fulfilled. We want to see basic services, including food, water, electricity, medical care, to your question, accessible to the people, to the Palestinian people, including, of course, to the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, at the same time, there's a governance dynamic in Gaza. And Gaza is, at least on a de facto basis, administered by a terrorist group that has shown no regard for the Palestinian people, at least nominally under their control. So that's a concern of ours. But taking all of this into account, we are looking for ways, as our Israeli partners are and our partners in the Palestinian Authority are as well, to fulfill those humanitarian needs, to take steps to ensure Israel's security, and to do so in a way that delivers benefits for the Palestinian people in Gaza.
So, I mean, just two quick follow-ups on what you're saying. On the issue of the right to self-defense, Israel uses this, to escape, any kind of accountability. So should there be some sort of a limit on how, this right to self-defense is used by or utilized by Israel, whether it's excessive force, utilizing American weapons and so on? Or maybe the Palestinians ought to be protected by the UN Security Council under Chapter 7. I wonder if the United States would ever support such a thing.
Saeed, the right to self-defense, it is written into international law. It is enshrined in the UN Charter. So, of course, Israel has that right. And unfortunately, far too often, there have been vivid demonstrations, brutal demonstrations of the need for Israel to exercise that right. Our goal is to see to it that Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal measures of safety, of security, of stability, of democracy, prosperity, and dignity. And if we get to that end state, which, as you know, is not right around the corner, unfortunately, but that is an end state, equal measures of stability and security that would necessitate fewer of the measures that Israel has been forced to resort to, and would allow countries around the world to take additional steps to support the Palestinian people in all of their humanitarian needs.
And lastly, I mean, I read an article in Responsible Statecraft. It says that should Biden's new arm transfer policy apply to Israel? And, because he tied a whole, series of human rights obligations before they could do that. Now, we know that every factory, every military equipment in Israel has basically been built by the Americans. Let's not go there. But Israel exports their weapons to countries that are well-known human rights abusers and so on. So should there be a connection between, sending so many arms and sending $4 billion a year in arms to Israel with its human rights records?
So, Saeed, our conventional arms transfer policy, and we just rolled this out for the administration a couple weeks ago now, but it provides a framework for U.S. security cooperation worldwide for all countries. It applies to all countries, and of course, that includes Israel. Other countries' arms export policies are their own sovereign decisions. All security cooperation on our part is assessed on a case-by-case basis on its individual merits according to the criteria laid out in that conventional arms transfer policy. And we can provide you with a pretty exacting list of the criteria that we look at when we make these case-by-case decisions, looking at the merits of each particular case. Where Israel is concerned, that also includes our longstanding commitment to Israel's security and to its qualitative military edge, which is enshrined in law. We're committed to that. We're committed to our conventional arms transfer policy. We're committed to Israel's security and to pursuing all of these things responsibly as a partner to Israel. Yeah, good. Stay on Israel, sure.
Syrian state media reported yesterday that an Israeli airstrike knocked Aleppo airport out of service and forced the Syrian authorities to reroute flights carrying aid for people affected by the earthquake. Do you have any information on this? Can you confirm whether it was an Israeli airstrike?
I can't speak to attribution, but we have seen these reports. I don't have any additional information I can share at this time.
Or any information.
Well, but let me
Additional-
let me
additional to what?
let me say this. Let me say this. Again, without speaking to the details of this, we would be concerned about the effects of any prolonged closure on the flow of humanitarian aid into those in need. This is an airport that has been a landing point for humanitarian assistance to those who have been affected in Syria by this devastating earthquake. And that would be a concern of ours if there was a prolonged closure and a prolonged impediment to the flow of humanitarian assistance.
What kind of message is there, to do this strike so, soon after the visit of the top American general to Syria?
I'm
What
not.
message is there? What are the Israelis are trying to say to you and to the rest of the world?
I Saeed, first, we're not speaking to attribution. Second, General Milley, of course, did not go to Aleppo.
Well,
And
he's in Syria, not that far away.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, thank you. If I could contribute today another round of appreciation for your hard work and professionalism. So thank you very much for
Thanks
that.
very much.
I got the exclusive article. It's about Nord Stream. I got the exclusive article of Das Erste, the German public broadcaster. And the original text says that German investigators have achieved a breakthrough and there are no concrete proofs at the moment, but the traces are leading to Ukraine. So as you can see, even the German public broadcaster, the pressure is a little bit building up. I just want some kind of clarification as to whether the United States has intelligence but is not going to discuss it until investigators have come to a conclusion, or you also, with the rest of the world, let's see what the investigators come up with.
First, we, as a standard matter, don't discuss intelligence that remains classified. So I couldn't speak to that element of the question.
Even if there's intelligence or not.
I just can't speak to intelligence that we haven't been in a position to declassify. On the first part of your question, though, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that German authorities are not quoted by name in any of these articles, nor are Danish authorities, nor are Swedish authorities. In all countries, of course, there are leaks, the veracity of which will defer to you all to judge. But we are going to let these investigations play out. We are going to wait to hear from the investigators themselves, who presumably, when these investigations conclude, will speak on a named attributable basis to their findings. That's something that, of course, we would take seriously, but anonymous leaks around the world is not something we're just going to...
It's my assumption that if the German investigators are leaking, or let's say speaking to the German public broadcaster, they must be speaking to you as well, right?
Of course, we discuss with Germany a range of issues, but I'm just not going to speak to this particular issue with our German ally because there's an ongoing investigation. It is incumbent on our European partners who are capable, who are competent, in whom we have full faith and confidence to conduct these investigations on an impartial basis and to come to their own conclusions. We're going to wait for them to come to their own
Last
conclusions.
question. Can the United States deny then that the traces are leading to Ukraine at the moment?
We're not conducting these investigations. Our German allies, our Swedish partners, our Danish partners are as well. We are going to let those investigators speak for themselves. Yes.
Thank you, Ned. I have a question on North Macedonia,
Sure.
but before I raise a question, I would like to join everyone in this room by expressing my appreciation for everything you have done in this role. Not only that you're knowledgeable, but I believe your genuine respect for journalism and journalists is unmatched. So thank you for
Thank you
that.
very much. Thanks.
My question, North Macedonia is supposed to change the preamble of the constitution to recognize ethnic Bulgarians as a constituent group. However, this didn't happen thus far. My question, in what way, if any, their Euro-Atlantic integration process could be affected, in maybe negative way perhaps, if they fail to implement that change to the preamble of the constitution and include ethnic Bulgarians? What is the US stance? Is there some way you can maybe help them achieve that? So what is the...
This is a question for North Macedonia. It's a question for the European Union. It's not a question for the United States. Of course, these decisions are ones that our partners on the other side of the Atlantic are going to have to make. We are a partner to North Macedonia. We want to support the aspirations of the people of North Macedonia for that further European integration. It is similar to the approach that we've taken to Georgia and a number of other countries over the course of several decades. We want to continue to be a partner, but ultimately these are going to have to be decisions that are made in North Macedonia and decisions that are made in Brussels.
Just one more question about the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue that is now taking place in North Macedonia in March. Now that the European proposal has been made public and we have all the articles in front of us, we are now talking about the implementation of the agreement. In what order of implementation the Serbian majority municipalities are going to be implemented? Is this the first thing, first item on the agenda now in March, or you have some other information? Or how do you see from the US perspective this going forward with implementation?
So a couple things on that. First, I think we've said before, but we welcome the leaders' talks under the EU-facilitated dialogue that took place late last month. We strongly support the process of normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia. To your question, this meeting was a good step forward, but difficult work remains, and some of these questions are part and parcel of that difficult work. Agreement on the implementation annex is essential to normalization under this EU proposal, and progress towards establishing the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities remains critical to building Kosovo's future as a sovereign, as a multi-ethnic and independent country integrated into Euro-Atlantic structures. Through the dialogue, Serbia and Kosovo, we believe, should come to a comprehensive agreement on normalization of relations. Progress will then open the door to European integration of both countries, and it's essential to greater security, stability, and prosperity in the Western Balkans. We believe that normalized relations should be centered on eventual mutual recognition. This is an EU-led process. The United States has supported our allies in the European Union in every way we can. We have been present for these talks. Gabe Escobar, our Deputy Assistant Secretary, has been actively engaged with the parties as well, and will continue to do what we can to support this process that, again, has moved forward in important ways with some difficult work ahead.
How far we are from the mutual recognition? Because some say it's 10 years from now, some say it's until this year. Do you see any timeline in terms of exact furthering mutual recognition?
Of course, we want these issues, these tensions between Kosovo and Serbia to be resolved at the earliest possible opportunity. And so we're going to support this EU dialogue. We're going to take any steps that we can as a partner to Kosovo and to Serbia and to the EU to support the acceleration in every conceivable way of the improvement of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, but we just can't put a time frame on it. Of course, we want to see these issues resolved as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
So this is a question on China. Does the administration plan to relax COVID restrictions from people coming from China soon, and if so, why?
This is not a question for the Department of State. It's more of a question for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The restrictions that and requirements that had been put in place, whether on the PRC or in other times, in other contexts, other countries, are based on the science. They are based on public health. They are not based on diplomacy. They are not based on matters of policy or policy disagreement. So this is a question for the CDC. The epidemiologists and the scientists and the public health experts at the CDC will make informed decisions about when it's prudent, if it's prudent, to relax requirements that are in place.
Okay, and just one more on the whole Taiwan status quo issue.
Sure.
What's the difference between the status quo and the one China policy? Because one China policy treats Taiwan as China, correct? And then how does, when you say you want to maintain the status quo, does that mean the same thing as one China policy?
Our one China policy is a key element of our efforts to preserve the status quo. By adhering always consistently to our one China policy, we are in turn contributing to the preservation of the status quo, strengthening the status quo, seeing to it that the status quo, in every way we can, that has existed across the Taiwan Strait over the course of several decades now, remains intact and remains strong.
And, sorry,
Yeah.
but how is China disrupting the status quo?
Well, I think we can point to any number of things that are of concern to us. It is a concern to us when China, when the PRC attempts to intimidate Taiwan through aerial sorties, through naval exercises, through coercive actions, coercive rhetoric. That, of course, is of concern to us. In the aftermath of the visit to Taiwan last August by Speaker Pelosi, we saw the PRC use that visit, which had been, of course, not unprecedented, as a pretext to attempt to undermine that status quo. And you can look at all of the actions, the coercive actions that sought to do little more than intimidate Taiwan and the broader region, and to undermine the status quo that has been at the crux of peace and security across the Taiwan Strait.
But don't we run military drills in that area as well?
We fly wherever international law allows. We sail wherever international law allows. All of our operations are consistent with international law. All of our operations are, whether land, sea, air, are consistent with our One China policy. Gita.
Thanks, Ned. I also want to echo every single colleague of mine here regarding your time here as spokesperson, and just a simple thank you. I have a question about IWOC awards.
Sure.
Specifically, the Madeleine Albright Honorary Group Award. What prompted the State Department to create that award? Was the Iranian women and girls movement that inspired it?
So Gita, of course, the award is named after former Secretary of State Albright and what she embodied in terms of championing the rights of women and girls, championing the upholding of universal rights around the world that have too often come under threat and too often act at the expense of women and girls. It was an effort to distill her core essence into a group award that could be provided every year to individuals who epitomize some of those very qualities, the qualities of strength, the qualities of courage, endurance, resilience, determination, that she put forward on the world stage, and so often that she put forward on the world stage in service of women and girls around the world. So over the course of the past 6 months, as we have witnessed the bravery, the determination, the resilience of the protesters in Iran, so many of whom are women, the leadership of this movement is in some ways dominated by women. We have seen the remarkable courage of these protesters, including these women who have taken to the streets at no shortage of personal risk to themselves, whether through injury, whether through persecution, whether through prosecution. And too many of these brave protesters who were doing nothing more than exercising the universal right to peaceful assembly have unfortunately paid a price. They are in prison, they've been harassed, they've been injured. In too many cases, the regime has ended their lives prematurely for doing nothing more than exercising a right that is as universal to them as it is to women and girls here in this country. So it was only fitting that upon witnessing the bravery and determination of these protesters, including the many women and girls at the vanguard of this movement, that the first group award go to the protesters of Iran. Yes, go ahead.
The U.S. Intelligence Threat Assessment report that was released today mentions Pakistan's long history of supporting anti-India terrorist groups. Now, the U.S. is having a counterterrorism dialogue with Pakistan, and Mr. Christopher Lambert was there recently. So, will the U.S. take up the issue of support by the Pakistani Army and ISI to terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, active in Kashmir, and to Khalistani terrorist groups?
So the U.S.-Pakistan counterterrorism dialogue, it provides an opportunity for the United States and Pakistan for the United States to convey our willingness to work with Pakistan to address terrorist threats and counter violent extremism. The threats that are in the region, the threats that have the potential to transcend the region as well. We have a shared interest in combating threats to regional security. The goal of a stable and secure South and Central Asia, free from terrorism, depends on the strength of, in large part, our partnership with Pakistan. The dialogue is a testament to our shared commitment to resilient security relationship and an opportunity for candid discussion on steps we can take together to counter all terrorist groups that threaten regional and global stability. The United States seeks to expand our partnership to address these challenges. Any group that threatens regional and global stability, of course, is a concern to us. It is something that we discuss in the context of this counterterrorism dialogue.
I have one more.
Okay, one more and then I'll go to you.
So, while the issue of support by Pakistan of terror groups against India and its dangers are mentioned in the report, what are your views on some of these groups like Khalistani activists that are active in North America and which were responsible for the bombing of Air India in 1985? Is the U.S. keeping a watch on these activities of these groups?
So we condemn terrorism in all of its forms. We condemn terrorism, we condemn violent extremism, we condemn all of those who resort to violence to achieve their ends, whether they are political or otherwise. There is never a justification to resort to violence. Regardless of the motivation, regardless of the perpetrator, we take the threat of terrorism around the world, whether that's to regional peace and security or to our own security, extraordinarily seriously. Yes?
Thank you. Iram from VOA. So, a nuclear armed country like Pakistan, who's facing major economic issues right now, political challenges as well, and terror attacks are on the rise, is US worried that this strategically important country could fail?
We are a partner to Pakistan. We have been there for Pakistan since its independence. We seek a stable, peaceful, and prosperous Pakistan. We know that the Pakistani people are facing tremendous hardship, including economic hardship. We continue to look for ways in which we can support the Pakistani people to rebuild and to deepen the economic partnership that has existed with the United States over the course of decades now. We are working with our Pakistani partners. Of course, Pakistan in turn is also working with international financial institutions, the IMF, to put itself on a sustainable growth path. But when it comes to economic challenges, when it comes to security challenges, when it comes to political challenges, the United States is ready and able to continue to be a partner to the people of Pakistan and to our Pakistani counterparts as well.
Some circles in Pakistan are accusing that, because they're looking for and wanting an IMF deal, but they're saying that because of tensions between US, China, there is a possibility that US, the friendly influence that they have at the IMF, are not using or could use but is not using for Pakistan to help Pakistan, which is an ally country.
Ultimately, it's going to have to be decisions on the part of our Pakistani counterparts to unlock this IMF funding. We encourage Pakistan to continue working with the IMF, especially on reforms that will improve Pakistan's business environment. We believe that doing so, and the IMF believes this, will make Pakistani business more competitive, will also help Pakistan attract high-quality investment. But more value than the potential investment dollars are the technologies, are the market connections and management systems that accompany foreign investment. They improve the competitiveness of partnering Pakistani firms, fueling economic growth that increases employment and household incomes. We believe that by continuing down this path and continuing to make the necessary decisions, economic decisions, that Pakistan can put itself with the support of the international community, of course with the support of the United States, on a path to sustainable growth.
last question about Women's March. Are you aware about the violence that took place in Pakistan during the Women's March and news of police being involved? Is US going to raise that issue with the allies in Pakistan, with Pakistan government?
We are aware of reports about clashes in Lahore ahead of a planned rally by former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. We encourage all to exhibit restraint. We offer our condolences to the families of those who lost their lives and wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured in this.
Are you going to talk to the government that they should uphold the democratic values that you share and the country shares?
It is a constant topic of discussion with our counterparts around the world, including in Pakistan. The importance of upholding the universal rights of citizens around the world, including the right to peaceful assembly.
Thank you.
Sure.
As you probably saw, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee gave a green light finally to Garcetti, Mayor Garcetti, to be ambassador to India. Obviously, the administration supports that, I presume, but could you say a little bit about whether there's optimism about the Senate floor vote? Maybe you don't want to get into congressional moves, but more broadly, what it means to have a full ambassador in India after this 2-year gap?
Well, we did see the action on the part of the Senate today. We heartily applaud that. Put simply, the United States needs a confirmed ambassador in India. Our team on the ground, including chargés who have served in the place of an ambassador, have done extraordinary work. But this is one of the most consequential bilateral relationships we have. When Secretary Blinken was in New Delhi last week, much of the breadth and the depth of that relationship was on full display. And our embassy staff, our Mission India, deserves to have a Senate-confirmed ambassador who is, again, with the consent of the Senate, a representative of not only the Secretary of State, but also the President of the United States. There is no other country around the world that would put itself in a position to have a vacancy open in a strategically important and valuable place like India for 2+ years now. We certainly hope that the action that the Senate took today foretells additional action. It would be in our interest, it would be in the interest of India, it would be in the interest of both of our people to have a confirmed ambassador in place, and we hope that Mayor and soon-to-be Ambassador Garcetti is able to take up that post before long. Yes, go ahead.
Question. Seems like there are some Chinese-made cranes around the Baltimore port and also some other port in the United States. Some report has pointed out those giant cargo cranes have a possibility of Chinese spy too. Do you have any? How does the State Department view those Chinese cranes?
This is a better question for some of our colleagues throughout the government. Of course, as an administration, as a government, we are acutely attuned to the various challenges we face from the PRC, including the challenge of espionage. And we've had an occasion in recent weeks, as some of you might recall, to talk about the challenge of PRC espionage, including in the United States. It is something that we take extraordinarily seriously, including and especially when it comes to strategically important sectors. But this is a better question for our colleagues across the government.
Can I ask one more
Sure.
question? So, United States has made an offer to Japan and South Korea to establish a new trial consultative deterrence. Consultative body on nuclear deterrence. Can you confirm those?
Our extended deterrence commitment to Japan and the ROK is ironclad. We have taken every opportunity we have to deepen and to make real, to ensure that we've made real the extended deterrence commitments that we have. We continue to work with the ROK, Japan, and other partners and allies to jointly strengthen deterrence and to work to limit the advancement of the DPRK's unlawful weapons programs. Yes, in the back. Go ahead.
Congratulations, I guess are in order.
Thank you.
But we'll miss you, I'm sure. So, about a month ago, the UN World Food Project program published a report pointing out that Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen are on the brink of starvation, with moving toward widespread deaths. Since then, we've had there are reports of stress on food in Cuba, and then also in Turkey and Syria, parts of Syria, because of the catastrophe there. Is grain from Ukraine going to be enough, and Russia, or do we need to do something additional? And is this the beginning of greater stresses on
Well,
foods?
We believe it certainly has to be part of the solution. And I think you only look at the counterexample. When grain from Ukraine was blocked by the Russians from leaving Ukrainian ports, we saw a spike in food prices around the world that had the most devastating impact on, unfortunately, the world's neediest. 30% price spike after Russia's invasion, when Russia was blocking ships from leaving Ukrainian ports. Now, the implementation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and what we hope is the renewal and the expansion of the Grain Initiative will have to be part of that solution. The World Food Program has been able to export Ukrainian grain precisely because of this initiative. Since August of last year, some 16 total World Food Program ships have left Ukraine, including more than 500,000 metric tons of wheat to places like what you mentioned: Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, Algeria, Kenya, Spain, and Egypt also received shipments. The total World Food Program exports just from this single initiative, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, has totaled about 1 billion loaves of bread. Now, the world needs far more, and it is far more than conflict that has exacerbated the price spike. It has been COVID, it has been climate, but it has been conflict. And so we're going to do everything that we can to see to it that this initiative remains in place and ideally is expanded so that the world's neediest and some of the countries you mentioned can continue to benefit from this. Dylan?
Yeah, defense officials confirmed this past weekend that there were Ukrainian pilots being evaluated in the U.S. on F-16s. So I just wanted to check, has there been any change in the administration's position that you guys don't think Ukraine particularly needs those right now, and it's not being considered to send them there?
There's been no change in the position. Of course, we're always working closely with our Ukrainian partners to discuss and to assess with them what their needs are at the moment, what their needs may be down the road. But there's been no change in our position. For additional details on the training that you referenced, I'd have to refer you to DoD.
So it remains the case that your main goal right now is to give Ukraine as much of an advantage as you can on the battlefield, and they're saying they need F-16s and have asked for them. We've now got Ukrainian pilots in the U.S. being evaluated on the F-16s, but there's still, even with all that, there's still no plans to send them there.
Our position on this has not changed. What we have consistently done is to provide our Ukrainian partners with what they need to take on the battle they're facing with an eye to the direction in which the battle's evolving. And I think you can see the effectiveness of that strategy across all of the fronts that our Ukrainian partners have not only withstood Russian aggression, but in many cases have wrested back from Russian control territory that invading Russian forces have had taken from them. So obviously this is a reflection of the bravery and the resilience and determination of our Ukrainian partners, but the enabling support that the United States government has provided at every phase of this conflict, along with the support of dozens of countries around the world, has provided a decisive edge in some ways to our Ukrainian partners and their ability to defend their country against this aggression. Yes.
I also want to thank you for your dedicated work as a spokesperson.
Thanks.
And I want to follow up on the question on US ROK Japan trilateral cooperation. Now the US has a bilateral consultative mechanism on extended deterrence with ROK and Japan separately. And recently ROK and Japan has announced on the historical issues of the forced labor. And generally speaking, what do you think about the need to deepen the trilateral cooperation in order to enhance the extended deterrence for ROK and Japan?
Well, our commitment to extended deterrence today, going forward, is ironclad. There is no question about that. The ROK, Japan are covered by that policy of extended deterrence. We're going to continue to work together in every way we can, bilaterally and trilaterally, to counter and to limit the advancement of the DPRK's unlawful weapons programs. We have done that for decades now. What we've been able to do more in recent years, and even more so recent months, is that trilateral cooperation. And we believe that the bilateral aspect is important between the United States, the ROK, between the United States and Japan, but the trilateral element is also fundamentally important, not only for the threat that our three countries face from the DPRK, but for our shared and collective vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The fact is that we share, the three of us, the United States, ROK, and Japan, we share interests and we share values. And so from the perspective of the United States, and increasingly what we're seeing from the perspective of our treaty allies, is the importance of a trilateral relationship that reflects those interests, that reflects those values, and is effective in protecting and promoting those values in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Sure.
Uganda specifically. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this legislation that is perceived or widely seen as anti-LGBTQ, and also apparently the sponsor, or if not the prime sponsor of it, is currently representing Uganda at a UN Women's Commission meeting in New York, and if you have any thoughts about that.
So broadly, Matt, I would say that we firmly oppose violence and discrimination against LGBTQI plus persons, and we urge governments everywhere to repeal laws that criminalize LGBTQI plus status or conduct, and we condemn laws that would undermine freedoms of speech, peaceful assembly, and association for LGBTQI plus human rights defenders and their allies. We condemn this any violence or discrimination targeting vulnerable populations, including LGBTQI plus persons, anywhere and everywhere. And governments must work to ensure that all individuals can freely enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms to which they are universally entitled. We remain committed to supporting health, democracy, the rule of law, freedom of expression, and prosperity in Uganda. And we continue to engage with our government of Uganda counterparts on a wide range of issues, including those related to human rights to improve the lives of all Ugandans. Now, when it comes to the representative that you referred to, I'm not in a position to confirm that. The UN may be in a better position to speak to it. What I will say broadly, however, is that the issues that are at play on the Commission on the Status of Women are the very issues that are at play when it comes to the rights of all individuals, including vulnerable individuals, including those of LGBTQI plus persons. It is impossible to separate something like the rights of women from the rights of marginalized people around the world. These are universal rights. We uphold all of them everywhere at all times.
Okay, but have you spoken specifically to the Ugandans about this piece of legislation? Because I get you speak in broad terms everywhere, and then Uganda, you say you talk about human rights. This is obviously a human rights issue, but have you specifically talked to the Ugandans about this piece of legislation?
Look, we are going to do, and we're going to say from here what we think is most likely to benefit the populations that we're talking about. In this case, it is marginalized citizens of Uganda, including its LGBTQI.
So someone has made a determination that calling the Ugandans out specifically on this piece of legislation will not help.
We are going to do what is most helpful to those we're seeking to protect in Uganda and around the world. Ugandan law already criminalizes same-sex conduct. A bill that further targets LGBTQI plus persons would constitute a significant step backwards for the protection of human rights and would undermine life-saving programs to address, for example, HIV/AIDS. This is a point that we make around the world. It's what we believe in this case.
Okay. That wasn't so hard to say, was it? Why couldn't you have said that at the very beginning?
Very quick questions, and we'll wrap up.
UN envoy in Afghanistan warned today that a Taliban administration crackdown on women's rights is likely to lead to a drop in aid and development funding in the country. Is the U.S. considering cutting funding?
The UN has been at the forefront of these efforts. It was a number of weeks ago now that a senior UN official visited Kabul to make very clear to the Taliban that the draconian edict that they implemented on December 24th of last year would have consequences for the ability of the international community to provide the humanitarian assistance that the people of Afghanistan so desperately need. We are in close touch with the UN. We are in close touch with other allies and partners who have also provided humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan over the course of many years now, and over the course especially of the past 18 months or so. You may have seen that the United States today, with 21 other countries, or 21 countries, and the EU, put out a joint statement on the women and girls in Afghanistan on the occasion of International Women's Day. We are going to continue to do everything we can to work with the international community and to make sure that the Taliban is under no illusions that they can have it both ways, that they can fail to fulfill the commitments that they've made to the people of Afghanistan, that they can take draconian steps like the ones they did last year with girls' education last December, with the ability of women to work with international NGOs and not face consequences from the international community. The UN has made that clear that that is not the case. The United States has made that clear that that is not the case. And dozens of countries around the world, including the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a number of Muslim majority countries have made very clear to the Taliban that their actions, their efforts to suppress the rights, especially of women and girls, but all minorities, will have real costs and consequences for them.
But are you considering cutting funding?
Again, we're taking a close look at the implications on our ability to deliver the type of humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan, the type of assistance that we know they so desperately need. We're closely consulting with the UN. Much of this is done under the auspices of the UN, so we want to make sure that we are in close coordination with our UN partners and other international partners. All right, thanks everyone.